A billionaire looked at a waitress and asked her one question. He thought he was playing a game. He thought he was about to humiliate her in front of the richest people in London. But when she answered, using just 6 words, his entire empire collapsed in less than 10 minutes. £18 billion gone. A 28-year prison sentence guaranteed. And it all started because he didn't know that the woman serving his drink was the daughter of someone he'd killed. This is the true story of how the invisible woman brought down a giant. And I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll never look at powerful people the same way again. Stay with me, because what happens next will shock you. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Let me tell you about a night that changed everything. A night when the smallest person in the room became the most powerful. This happened in London, at a place called the Sterling House, on December 3rd, 2024. And I need you to understand something before we begin. Sometimes the people we don't see are the ones watching us the most carefully. Her name was Rachel Bennett. She was 28 years old, and she worked as a waitress at the Sterling House, one of the most expensive private clubs in all of London. The kind of place where a single dinner costs more than most people earn in a month. Rachel earned £13 an hour. She had been working there for almost a year, moving through crowds of wealthy people like a shadow, carrying trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than her weekly wages. On this particular night, the club was hosting its annual winter gala. This wasn't just any party. This was where pharmaceutical giants, oil tycoons, and real estate moguls gathered to celebrate their success. The women wore jewelry that could feed a village. The men wore watches that could buy houses. And Rachel? She wore a simple black uniform with a white collar, her blonde hair pulled back tight, her feet aching in shoes she'd owned for 3 years. She kept her head down as she worked. That was the rule for people like her. Be invisible. Be efficient. Don't make eye contact unless spoken to. She had learned this lesson well. In this world, waiters and waitresses weren't people. They were furniture that moved. But Rachel had a reason for being there that night. A reason that had nothing to do with the small paycheck she would receive at the end of the week. She was there for justice. She was there for her mother. Let me tell you about her mother, Patricia Bennett. Patricia had worked for 15 years at a factory in Manchester that manufactured chemicals for industrial cleaning products. The factory was owned by a massive pharmaceutical corporation called Harrington Industries. For 15 years, Patricia breathed in toxic fumes every single day. The ventilation system was broken. The safety masks they were given were cheap and useless. The workers complained, but the company ignored them. 3 years ago, Patricia collapsed at work. The doctors found stage 4 lung cancer. It had spread everywhere. She had never smoked a day in her life. The cancer came from the chemicals she breathed at that factory. Patricia and 40 other workers filed a lawsuit against Harrington Industries, demanding compensation for their medical bills and suffering. But Harrington Industries was powerful. They had lawyers that cost £1,000 an hour. They had connections in the government. They had money that could make problems disappear. The case was thrown out of court. The workers got nothing. Patricia died 6 months later in a small hospice room, struggling to breathe, her medical bills crushing Rachel with debt she could never repay. And the man responsible? The CEO of Harrington Industries? He was here tonight, celebrating at the Sterling House. His name was Thomas Whitmore. He was 62 years old, worth £18 billion, and he didn't lose a single minute of sleep over the workers his company had killed. Rachel's manager grabbed her arm as she refilled her tray in the kitchen. "Rachel, I need you in the diamond room. The VIP section." Sarah called in sick. Rachel's heart started beating faster. The diamond room. That's where Thomas Whitmore would be. "I usually work the main floor," Rachel said quietly. "Not tonight," her manager insisted. "It's triple pay for tonight. And if you refuse, don't bother coming back tomorrow." Rachel thought about the bills stacked on her kitchen table. The funeral expenses she was still paying off. The lawyer fees from the failed lawsuit. She needed every penny. "I'll do it," she whispered. She picked up her tray of expensive whiskey and walked through the heavy velvet curtains into the diamond room. The atmosphere was different here. Quieter. More intense. These weren't just wealthy people. These were the people who controlled the wealth. 15 men and women sat around a massive mahogany table, talking in low voices about mergers and acquisitions, about stock prices and political influence. And at the head of the table sat Thomas Whitmore. He looked exactly like he did in the newspapers. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than a car. He was laughing at his own joke, his voice booming with confidence. He was telling a story about how he'd crushed a competitor in the pharmaceutical industry. I told him, Whitmore laughed, his drink sloshing in his hand. You can keep your principles, or you can keep your business. You can't have both. The table erupted in sickening laughter. These people found cruelty entertaining. Rachel moved silently around the table, refilling glasses, replacing napkins. She made herself as small as possible. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them steady through pure willpower. She approached Whitmore's chair. His glass was nearly empty. She reached forward to replace it with a fresh one. "Don't touch that," Whitmore said sharply. His voice cut through the laughter like a knife. Everyone went silent. Rachel froze, her hand hovering over the glass. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly, keeping her eyes down. You thought. Whitmore interrupted, turning in his chair to look at her. His eyes were cold, like looking into winter ice. "I don't pay for waitresses who think. I pay for waitresses who follow orders." "Yes, sir," Rachel whispered. She tried to back away, but Whitmore raised his hand. "Wait." That single word felt like a trap closing. And Rachel knew, in that moment, that everything was about to change. Thomas Whitmore stood up from his chair. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall, and he used his size to intimidate people. Rachel was 5'4". She felt like a child standing before a school principal who enjoyed punishment. Whitmore walked around her slowly, looking her up and down like she was a piece of furniture he was considering buying. The other guests watched with amusement. This was entertainment for them, watching a powerful man toy with a powerless woman. "What's your name?" Whitmore asked. "Rachel, sir." "Rachel," he repeated, tasting the name. "You look nervous, Rachel." "Do I make you nervous?" "No, sir. I just want to do my job properly." "Your job," Whitmore scoffed. He turned to address the table. "Do you see this, everyone? This is the problem with the working class. No ambition. No vision. Content to carry trays while we carry the economy on our shoulders." A few people chuckled. Rachel felt her face burning with shame and anger. "Tell me, Rachel," Whitmore continued, stepping closer. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, sir. You're Mr. Whitmore." "And do you know what I do?" Rachel knew exactly what he did. She knew about the factory. She knew about her mother. She knew about the 40 workers who got sick and received nothing. But she kept her voice neutral. "You run Harrington Industries, sir." "Run?" Whitmore laughed. "I built Harrington Industries from nothing. I employ 30,000 people across 5 countries. I create medicines that save lives. I am a pillar of British industry." Rachel said nothing. The medicines his company created cost so much that poor people couldn't afford them. But she bit her tongue. Whitmore reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather checkbook. He held it up so everyone could see. "I'm feeling generous tonight," Whitmore announced to the room. "I want to play a little game." Rachel's stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came from rich men playing games with poor women. "I'm going to ask you one simple question, Rachel," Whitmore said, opening the checkbook. "Just one question. If you answer it honestly, I will write you a check right now for £50,000. Gasps rippled around the table. £50,000. That was more than Rachel earned in 3 years. That was enough to pay off all her debts. That was freedom. "And if I get it wrong?" Rachel asked quietly. Whitmore smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Then you're fired. And I'll make sure you never work at any establishment in London again. I have friends everywhere, Rachel. Everywhere." The threat hung in the air. Rachel looked at the faces around the table. Some looked excited. Some looked uncomfortable. But none of them would help her. None of them would stop this. "Why?" Rachel asked. "Why would you do this?" "Because I'm bored," Whitmore shrugged. "And I want to see if someone like you has any capacity for honesty. The working class always lies. Always plays the victim. I want to see if you're different." Rachel took a deep breath. This was the moment. This was why she had spent a year working at this club, listening, gathering information. This was why she had endured the insults, the long hours, the aching feet. For this moment. "Ask your question," Rachel said. Whitmore's smile widened. He thought he had her exactly where he wanted her. He thought she was desperate, cornered, willing to humiliate herself for money. He had no idea who he was really dealing with. "Look around this room, Rachel," Whitmore said, gesturing broadly. "Look at the art on these walls. Original pieces worth millions. Look at the jewelry these ladies are wearing. Diamonds and emeralds worth more than your childhood home. Look at this table, solid mahogany from Indonesia, carved by master craftsmen. He paused for effect, enjoying his moment. My question is simple, Whitmore said softly. What is the most expensive thing in this room? The guests started murmuring. One woman touched her diamond necklace. A man glanced at the painting on the wall, an original piece by a famous artist. They thought it was a trick question. Whitmore watched Rachel carefully, waiting for her to point at something stupid. Waiting for her to say the painting or the furniture or his watch. He was ready to mock her lack of sophistication. But Rachel didn't look at the painting. She didn't look at the jewelry. She stood perfectly still, her face changing from fear to something else. Something colder. Something dangerous. She looked Thomas Whitmore directly in the eye. She didn't blink. She didn't look away. Do you really want me to answer that, Thomas? She asked. She didn't call him sir. She didn't call him Mr. Whitmore. She used his first name. The room went absolutely silent. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that happens before lightning strikes. The guests looked at each other in shock. No one spoke to Thomas Whitmore like that. No one. Whitmore's smile faltered for just a second. A crack in his confidence. But he covered it quickly with a sneer. Thomas, he repeated. It seems our little waitress has forgotten her place. Security. You asked me a question, Rachel interrupted. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a strange power to it. You offered £50,000 for an honest answer. Are you taking back your offer because you're afraid of what I'll say? Whitmore's hand hovered over the button under the table that would call security. But he stopped. His ego was too big. If he called security on a small waitress, he would look weak in front of his powerful friends. I fear nothing, Whitmore said coldly. Say whatever you want, girl. Then collect your severance pay and get out. Rachel smiled. But it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. All right then, Rachel said. Let me tell you what the most expensive thing in this room really is. Rachel began to walk slowly around the table. Her footsteps echoed in the silent room. Every eye was on her. The guests looked confused, uncertain. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. The waitress was supposed to be humiliated, not commanding the room. To answer your question properly, Rachel said, we need to understand what value really means. You think value is a price tag. You think it's what something costs at an auction. But you're wrong. She stopped behind a heavy-set woman wearing a massive emerald necklace. The woman shifted uncomfortably. Take Mrs. Victoria Ashford, for example, Rachel said, gesturing to the woman. That emerald necklace she's wearing is insured for £2 million. Beautiful, isn't it? Victoria touched her throat nervously. How dare you? It's a fake, Rachel said calmly. The real necklace was sold 8 months ago in Geneva to pay off gambling debts that her husband accumulated in Monaco. She wears this replica to keep their shareholders from panicking about their financial troubles. Victoria's face went white. Her husband looked at her in horror. The other guests began whispering. Whitmore stood up. That's enough. I'm not finished, Rachel said, her voice cutting through his. You asked a question. I'm answering it. She moved to the next guest, a young man in his 30s wearing an expensive watch. And you, Mr. David Crawford, Rachel continued. That Patek Philippe on your wrist is worth £150,000. Very impressive. Except you bought it with money you embezzled from your client's pension funds. If the regulators looked at your computer, the one sitting in the coat room right now, you'd be in prison before breakfast. David's wine glass fell from his hand, shattering on the floor. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood. The room was in chaos now. People were standing up, shouting. But Rachel's voice rose above them all. Do you want to know what the most expensive thing in this room is? Rachel asked, looking directly at Thomas Whitmore. She reached into her apron pocket. Everyone flinched, perhaps expecting a weapon. Instead, she pulled out a small recording device. It was old, scratched, barely worth £10 at a pawn shop. She placed it on the table in front of Whitmore. This, Rachel said. This is the most expensive thing in this room. Whitmore stared at the device. He looked confused, but something in his expression showed fear. Deep, primal fear. What is that? He asked, his voice shaking. It's a recording, Rachel said. From December 8th, 2019. Do you remember that date, Thomas? Whitmore's face changed. All the color drained from it. His hands started trembling. That was the date, Rachel continued, her voice getting stronger. when the safety inspector visited your factory in Manchester. The factory where my mother worked, where she breathed toxic chemicals every single day for 15 years. The room went completely silent. The inspector told you the ventilation system was broken, Rachel said. He told you that workers were getting sick. He told you that if you didn't fix it immediately, people would die. Do you remember what you said to him? Whitmore sat down heavily in his chair. Stop, he whispered. You said. Rachel pressed play on the device. A scratchy recording filled the room. It was clearly Thomas Whitmore's voice, younger but unmistakable. Listen carefully, the recorded voice said. I don't care about ventilation. I care about profit margins. Fixing that system costs £2 million. I'm not spending that money on factory workers who are replaceable. If they get sick, we'll settle quietly and make them sign non-disclosure agreements. I've got judges in my pocket. I've got politicians on my payroll. No one will touch me. Now take this envelope, write a passing report, and everyone wins. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was deafening. Every person at that table stared at Thomas Whitmore in horror. They were sharks, and they smelled blood in the water. My mother, Rachel said, her voice breaking for the first time, was Patricia Bennett. She worked in that factory for 15 years. She died of lung cancer 3 years ago because you decided her life wasn't worth £2 million. Tears streamed down Rachel's face, but she didn't wipe them away. She wanted everyone to see them. 40 workers got sick, Rachel continued. 40 families filed a lawsuit. And you crushed them. You bought the judges. You bought the politicians. You made the case disappear. And then you came here to places like this and laughed about it. Whitmore looked around the table desperately. This is a setup. This recording could be fake. This woman is lying. I'm not finished, Rachel said. Because here's the thing, Thomas. You're not just on that recording. There are 12 other recordings. 12 other conversations where you admit to bribing officials, falsifying safety reports, and silencing sick workers. She pulled out her phone and held it up. And 5 minutes ago, Rachel said, before I walked into this room, I uploaded every single recording to the internet. I sent them to the BBC, to The Guardian, to Parliament, to the police. I sent them everywhere. Whitmore lunged across the table, trying to grab the phone. Give me that. It's too late, Rachel said, stepping back. It's already done. The world knows what you are. Whitmore fell back into his chair, his face in his hands. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. That recording, Rachel said quietly, cost my mother everything. It cost 40 families everything. But now, Thomas, it's going to cost you everything too. She looked at him with a mixture of pain and satisfaction. That's the most expensive thing in this room, Rachel said. The truth. And unlike your fortune, the truth can't be bought, can't be buried, and can't be destroyed. The doors to the diamond room burst open. It wasn't security coming to remove Rachel. It was Rachel's manager, looking pale and terrified, followed by 3 police officers. Mr. Whitmore, one of the officers said, a tall woman with a no-nonsense expression. I'm Detective Inspector Sarah Clark. We need you to come with us. Whitmore stood up, trying to regain some dignity. This is absurd. Do you know who I am? I'll have your badge. We've heard the recordings, sir, the detective interrupted. All 12 of them. We've also received testimony from the factory safety inspector you bribed. He's turned state's witness. We're arresting you for corporate manslaughter, bribery, obstruction of justice, and fraud. The other guests began scrambling toward the exits. They didn't want to be associated with this disaster. Within seconds, the room that had been full of powerful people was empty except for Whitmore, the police, and Rachel. Whitmore looked at Rachel with pure hatred. You think you've won? You think this changes anything? I have the best lawyers in the country. I'll be out by morning. Perhaps, Rachel said quietly. But you won't have your company anymore. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and held it up so Whitmore could see. That's a news alert, Rachel said. Your board of directors held an emergency meeting 20 minutes ago. They voted you out as CEO. Harrington Industries is cutting all ties with you to save their reputation. Whitmore's face crumpled. No, that's impossible. I built that company. You own 42%, Rachel corrected. The other shareholders own 58%. And they've decided you're too toxic to keep. The detective stepped forward with handcuffs. Mr. Whitmore, turn around, please. Wait, Whitmore said desperately, looking at Rachel. Wait, I'll make this right. I'll give you money. £10 million. 20 million. Name your price. Just delete those recordings. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. This man who had killed her mother. This man who had laughed about it. This man who thought everything could be bought. There is no price, Rachel said softly. My mother's life didn't have a price. Those 40 workers' lives didn't have a price. And justice doesn't have a price. The detective handcuffed Whitmore. As they led him toward the door, he looked back at Rachel one last time. Who are you? He asked, his voice breaking. How did you get those recordings? Rachel smiled sadly. The factory safety inspector you bribed? His name was James Harrison. He was my uncle, my mother's brother. He wore a wire to every meeting with you because he knew, eventually, someone would be brave enough to use the evidence. He died of guilt 2 years ago, but he left me everything. She paused. I spent a year working here, watching you, waiting for the perfect moment. You thought I was invisible. You thought I was nothing. But the invisible people are the ones who see everything. Whitmore was led away, and Rachel could hear him sobbing as the police took him down the hall. The manager approached Rachel nervously. Rachel, I didn't know. About your mother. About any of this. I know, Rachel said tiredly. That's why I never told you. You would have stopped me. You're fired, of course, the manager said. I can't have you working here after this. I quit a week ago, Rachel said. I just didn't tell you. She took off her apron and laid it on the table. Then she walked out of the diamond room, out of the Sterling house, and into the cold London night. Outside, a crowd had gathered. News vans lined the street, their cameras pointed at the building. Someone had leaked that Thomas Whitmore was being arrested. Reporters shouted questions at the police cars. Rachel pulled her coat tight and walked past them unnoticed. Just another working person heading home. Her phone rang. It was her aunt, her mother's sister. Rachel? Oh my God, Rachel, I just saw the news. Tell me that's really him. Tell me they've got him. They've got him, Aunt Linda, Rachel said, tears streaming down her face. It's over. They've got him. She could hear her aunt crying on the other end of the line. Patricia would be so proud of you. So proud. Rachel sat on a bench at the bus stop, her legs finally giving out. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind exhaustion so deep she felt like she might never move again. But she also felt something else. Peace. For the first time in 3 years, since watching her mother struggle for breath in that hospital bed, Rachel felt peace. A text message came through from a block number. Thank you. A former Harrington factory worker. Then another. My husband worked at that factory. He's still sick. Thank you for giving us hope. Then another. And another. Dozens of messages from people she'd never met, all saying the same thing. Thank you. Rachel looked up at the London sky. It was starting to snow, soft flakes drifting down like feathers. We did it, Mum, she whispered to the night. We did it. The bus arrived, its brakes hissing. Rachel stood up, picked up her bag, and got on. She paid her fare with coins from her pocket and found a seat in the back. As the bus pulled away from the Sterling house, she looked back one last time. Police lights still flashed. Reporters still shouted. The building that had represented power and privilege was now the scene of a crime. And Rachel Bennett, the invisible waitress, had brought it all down. 6 months later, Rachel stood in a very different room. It wasn't glamorous like the Sterling house. The walls were plain white, the chairs were plastic, and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. But this room was more important than any diamond-filled dining hall. This was courtroom number 7 at the Old Bailey, London's Central Criminal Court. And today was the day of Thomas Whitmore's sentencing. The trial had been the biggest news story in Britain for months. The recordings Rachel had released went viral around the world. They'd been played on every news channel, analyzed by every legal expert, shared millions of times on social media. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just the recordings, but testimony from dozens of workers, from the safety inspector, from whistleblowers inside Harrington Industries who finally felt safe enough to speak. The whole rotten system that Whitmore had built came crashing down like a house of cards. Rachel sat in the public gallery, wearing a simple gray dress. Next to her sat 15 other people, all family members of workers who had died at the Manchester factory. They held hands, supporting each other. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Judge Margaret Foster was known for being fair but strict. She looked at Thomas Whitmore with an expression of cold disapproval. Whitmore looked nothing like the confident billionaire from that night at the Sterling house. He'd lost weight. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame. His silver hair had turned white. Prison had broken him in ways that money never could. "Mr. Whitmore," the judge said, her voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. "I have presided over many cases in my career, but few have shown such callous disregard for human life as yours. You had the power to save people, and you chose profit instead. You had the opportunity to do right, and you chose corruption." Whitmore kept his head down, staring at his hands. "The evidence shows that you knowingly allowed dangerous working conditions to continue," the judge continued. "You bribed officials. You falsified safety reports. And when workers became sick and dying, you used your wealth and influence to silence them. You treated human beings as disposable resources." Rachel felt tears on her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. These were good tears. These were tears of relief. "I am sentencing you to 20 years in prison for corporate manslaughter," the judge said. "An additional 5 years for bribery and corruption. And a further 3 years for obstruction of justice. These sentences will run consecutively. That's 28 years total." Gasps filled the courtroom. It was one of the longest sentences ever given for corporate crimes in British history. "Furthermore," the judge added, "I am ordering the seizure of your personal assets to establish a compensation fund for the victims and their families. Every penny you made while those workers suffered will now go toward helping them." Whitmore finally looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm 62 years old. 28 years means I'll die in prison." The judge looked at him without sympathy. "Patricia Bennett was 53 when she died struggling to breathe because of your factory. She didn't get to appeal her sentence. Neither will you." The guards led Whitmore away. As he passed Rachel's row, he looked at her one last time. She met his eyes steadily. There was no triumph in her gaze, no satisfaction. Just sadness for all the pain he'd caused, and relief that he couldn't cause any more. After the sentencing, Rachel stood outside the courthouse with the other families. News cameras surrounded them, reporters shouting questions. But this time Rachel didn't hide. She stepped forward to the microphones. "My mother, Patricia Bennett, was a good woman," Rachel said, her voice strong and clear. "She worked hard every day of her life. She trusted her employer to keep her safe. That trust was betrayed." She paused, looking directly into the cameras. "This case isn't just about one bad man or one bad company," Rachel continued. "It's about a system that allows powerful people to treat workers as worthless. It's about how money can buy silence, but it can't buy truth. And it's about how ordinary people, when they work together and refuse to give up, can defeat even the richest, most powerful people in the world." Someone in the crowd started clapping. Then another person. Then more. Soon the whole street was applauding. Rachel smiled through her tears. "My mother didn't live to see this day. But I hope, wherever she is, she knows that her life mattered. That she mattered. That all the workers who suffered and died mattered." That evening, Rachel visited her mother's grave in Manchester. It was a simple headstone in a simple cemetery, but Rachel had placed fresh flowers there every week for 3 years. She sat on the grass beside the grave, not caring about the dampness soaking through her dress. "We won, Mum," Rachel said softly. 28 years. He'll never hurt anyone else." The wind rustled through the trees, and Rachel imagined it was her mother's voice, telling her well done. "The compensation fund is going to help everyone," Rachel continued. "All 40 families. They'll get the medical care they need, the financial support they deserve. It won't bring anyone back, but it's something. It's justice." She pulled an envelope from her bag. It was her acceptance letter to law school. She'd been accepted to study at the University of Manchester, specializing in workers' rights and corporate accountability. "I'm going to keep fighting, Mum," Rachel promised. "There are so many more people like you out there, people being hurt by companies that think they're above the law. I'm going to be the person who stands up for them. I'm going to be their voice." She stood up, touching the headstone gently. "You taught me that every person matters," Rachel said. "You taught me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's scary. Thank you for that, Mum. Thank you for everything." As she walked back to her car, Rachel felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of grief and anger that had pressed down on her for so long had finally lifted. Thomas Whitmore had asked her what the most expensive thing in the room was. He'd expected her to say money, or jewels, or art. But Rachel had given him the real answer. The most expensive thing in the world is truth. And once the truth comes out, no amount of money can put it back in the box. Justice has no price tag. It can't be bought or sold. It can only be earned through courage, persistence, and the refusal to stay silent in the face of wrong. Rachel Bennett, the waitress who everyone thought was invisible, had proved that sometimes the smallest voice in the room can create the biggest change. And that night, as snow began to fall gently over Manchester, Rachel went home to her small apartment, made herself a cup of tea, and opened her law textbook. She had work to do. There were more battles to fight, more voices to amplify, more truths to tell. And she was just getting started.